Greetings. Father Mark signing on, continuing the course on the early modern period and specifically the second installment of the 13th century. Before continuing, I have to offer a word of thanks to Eric and Wendy ensconced in Maryland for the gift of this new microphone. So if you can hear me better, all of you out there in the internet, thank Eric and Wendy. Okay. So picking up where we left off last time, Pope Innocent IV died on the 7th of December, 1254, after a reign of 11 years and 6 months. Rinaldo de Geni was, on his mother's side, related to the House of Segni, the Italian House of Segni. He was a nephew of Pope Gregory IX, and Gregory IX was a nephew of Pope Innocent III. Gregory IX made Rinaldo a cardinal deacon and protector of the Order of Friars Minor, conventionally the Franciscans, in the year 1227. He was ordained Bishop of Ostia, the port of Rome, in 1231, and became Dean of the College of Cardinals in 1244. Pope Innocent IV died in Naples in southern Italy in 1254, so the conclave was held there instead of in Rome. Rinaldo accepted election as Pope 181 on the 12th of December 1254, reigning under the name Alexander IV for 6 years and 5 months. 2 years after his election, bringing us to the year 1256, Alexander IV was drawn into the ongoing dispute at the University of Paris between the mendicant orders, who we introduced last time, the Dominicans and chronologically, the Franciscans and the Dominicans, against the rest of the faculty of the university. The controversy derived from the distinct nature of the mendicant way of life, which was, it must be recalled, entirely new from their perspective in the 13th century. Previously, the only religious orders were monastic, and other than monastic, the only other kind of clergy were the hierarchical clergy, or as they were called, the secular clergy, or as we'd say today, the diocesan clergy, which is me, parish priest. So remember, the mendicants did not take the votum stabilitatis, the vow of permanence, or the vow of stability, to one monastery, like monks did, meaning they were free, intentionally so, because Francis, that he wanted them to be free to pursue apostolic work wherever they were needed. And then once they were no longer needed, once they had achieved stability, they would pass on whatever foundation, whatever mission they established onto the regular hierarchy and then move on somewhere else where they were needed. Additionally, as the origin of their name indicates, mendicare is the Latin verb meaning to beg, the mendicants lived by begging, rather than from property endowments, as did the monastic orders of the time, or from benefices, as did the hierarchical clergy at the time, the secular clergy. The mendicants believed that they earned the right to support by all the Christian faithful because of their labor, which consisted of hearing confessions, preaching, spiritual edification, and teaching. In practical structure, as they grew in numbers, the way they did the begging was that in each friary would assign two priest friars and 2 brothers, and that would be their service to that they would beg for food or donations to support the other friars. So all of that we we talked about last time. Now, the next stage in the mendicant story introduces us to the Most Reverend William of Auvergne, or he's also called William of Paris because he served as Bishop of Paris from the year 1228 until his death in 1249. William of Auvergne was born in Auvergne, France, southern France, around the year 1180. He studied theology at the University of Paris, was awarded recognition as a magister, received what we would think of as a master's degree in the year 1220. He took as his project reconciliation of Aristotle with Augustine, which was new. I mean, typically Augustine, that the ancient philosopher that is most used by Augustine was Plato rather than Aristotle. But anyway, that's what he did, and that culminated in his opus Magisterium Divinale on the teaching of God. Refuting the content of that book was refuting the errors of the Cathars. Remember, that was a dualist revival of a dualist heresy, as well as refuting the pantheistic heresy, belief in the eternality or the divinity of the material world. 3 years later, in the year 1223, he was admitted, William was admitted as a canon to the Cathedral of Notre Dame in Paris. And remember, canons that were a priest, secular priest, but they lived in community, they prayed in common, and they were attached to a particular church more often than not, a cathedral, as was the case here. 5 years later, in 1228, Pope Gregory IX ordained him Bishop of Paris at the age of 48. The following year, in March of 1229, a crisis occurred in Paris. On Shrove Tuesday, 1229. Shrove Tuesday was the medieval term for Mardi Gras, the day before Ash Wednesday. So on Shrove Tuesday in 1229, a riot erupted in the Saint-Marcel quarter of Paris between university students and tavern keepers. The arguments were over non-payment of their liquor bill. The conflict escalated and became full-scale riots. Property was damaged, lives were lost, and many more were injured. So, one must remember the difference in terminology. University students in the 13th century could be as young as 13 years old. And they'd stay, depending on their circumstances, could stay for 12 years. And so university then did not mean the same thing as we think of now. So you could have these, anywhere from age 13 through 26. Naturally, after the riot, the aggrieved individuals and businesses sought legal redress and restitution from the students, many of whom were children of the nobility. Because, who else can afford to, send their kids away for 12 years of further study? Now, they weren't all that, as we'll see, there were those who were studying for the church, but, otherwise, it had to be people with resources to be able to do that. However, as we covered previously, the University of Paris had its origin from a union of two monastic schools with an ecclesiastical school. So even by this point in 1229, the students were technically clerics, having been tonsured. So that changed after Vatican II with Pope Paul VI. But prior to that, one was admitted to the clerical state, and then there were 4 minor orders and 4 major orders. So these, they technically were clerics. Significant because in medieval law, those in the clerical state, enjoyed the privilegium clericale, the benefit of clergy, the benefit of being clergy, meaning that they were outside the jurisdiction of the secular courts, and they could only be tried by ecclesiastical courts. So the idea of separation of church and state, that's much later in history. It wouldn't have occurred to anyone in the 13th century. Ecclesiastical courts. Now, okay, so what does that mean? That could be terrifying for someone accused of heresy. But for all other offenses, such as those at issue in the Shrove Tuesday riots, ecclesiastical courts were notoriously lenient. For example, if an accused would swear an oath of purgation, swear that he was innocent, and if he could find 12 others to come to the ecclesiastical court and also publicly take an oath testifying to his innocence, that was it. Then the accused would be acquitted. And that's what happened. So the aggrieved parties, the tavern keepers, as well as those who lost property was damaged, houses, other businesses, property was damaged in the riots, appealed to the king. But the king at the time was a child who would become King Louis IX. Well, technically he was king, but he was a child. So King Louis IX, who is Saint Louis, King of France. So for those of you in the parish watching this on the YouTube channel, yes, that is our patron, St. Louis, King of France. So the appeal was received by his mother, the Queen Regent, Blanche of Castile. As she was born a Spanish princess, she was a devout Catholic. So one might think that she would naturally side with the ecclesiastical courts. However, the reverse is what happened. Because of her devout faith, she was deeply offended that petty criminals, well, not petty, because some people died in the riot, so I shouldn't say petty, but that criminals were misusing church courts in such a way. So she ordered that restitution be made. So she sort of pulled rank on the ecclesiastical courts. And she ordered that the collection of the restitution be enforced by the city guards, which means soldiers. Enforcement of that, trying to collect the restitution, led to another riot and even more loss of life. Now, members of the University of Paris expected Bishop William, the Bishop of Paris, to support them, since he had been an alumnus of the university, and since one of the constituents of the university was his own cathedral school, the Cathedral of Notre Dame. But, again, like the Queen, quite the reverse happened. He regarded the students as entirely to blame for this, for instigating the riots by their drunken brawling and by their refusal, to pay for their booze. And he agreed with the Queen Regent, with Queen Blanche, that evading restitution through misuse of the church courts was repugnant. In protest for this, against both the Queen and the Bishop, and the city, the citizens in Paris, many of the professors and the students left in what amounted to a medieval version of a strike. I don't want to. They obviously didn't use that term, so I don't want to be anachronistic, but it was. They left out of protest, so it is sort of a strike. If you recall, this was exactly the kind of situation. Violence in a town, disputes between students and the town and gown riots. Between the students and the non-students and just the citizens of a town. It's exactly that kind of situation that led to the secession from the University of Oxford of so many students and faculty that they formed a whole nother university, the University of Cambridge, meaning Oxford never got them back. And so and there was a real possibility that this could happen again to Paris, because some of the faculty ceased to teach, and some of the students left. Not obviously those who were accused, left because they didn't want to have to pay. And even if they had the money, even if their families are wealthy, they didn't want to have to go home and tell their father, the Duke, hey, you owe, 1,000 gold coins to this tavern keeper because I was a drunken idiot. They didn't want to do that, so they left. This placed an economic strain on the student quarter of Paris, which was called the Latin Quarter, because the students came from all over, spoke different languages, but Latin was the language of teaching, so they all spoke Latin, so therefore that was the common language. So even today, if you go visit, on the maps, the tourist maps, they'll say this is the Latin Quarter, So in this circumstance, with the university kind of falling apart, Bishop William turned for help to a friend. They were friends from their student days, and then after they finished, that life just took them in different directions. But the friendship, those kind of friendships, you can just pick up where you left off, even if you never see each other for years. So this guy's name was Roland of Cremona, or Rolando. He was Italian, Rolando of Cremona. Bishop William tracked him down and appointed him professor of theology, so that at least some classes could continue, at least theology classes could continue. Now, Rolando had two characteristics that rendered him objectionable to many who remained at the university. Objection number one, he was a Dominican, meaning a mendicant. Objection number two, he did not have a doctorate. After earning his licentiate to teach from the University of Paris, Rolando returned to his homeland of Italy, and there he joined the Dominicans in 1219. That was a decade before the riot. The order assigned him to lecture at the College of Toulouse in southern France, because it was in southern France, and so it could serve as a convenient base for him to conduct preaching missions against the Cathar heresy. And remember, preaching against that is one of the things that got St. Dominic to found the order of preachers. So Friar Rolando, was still engaged in this mission when the founder of the order, St. Dominic, died. That death introduces us to Blessed Jordan of Saxony. Jordan, or Jordanus, as they would say in the Latin, was a younger son of the Count of Eberstein in the Diocese of Paderborn, so an aristocrat. While a student in Paris, Jordanus also studied at the University of Paris. While he was there, Jordanus met St. Dominic, who, you remember from previously, spent years in France preaching against the Cathar heresy. And because the Cathar heresy, the Albigensians, as they, the French version of it was called, that led to a 2-decade-long civil war. So Dominic made frequent, even though the Cathars, their base was in the south, because it was a civil war, Dominic made visits back and forth to Paris to, speak to the kings. And so as a result of this meeting, Jordanus was inspired, and he joined the Order of Preachers in 1220 at the age of 30, 9 years before the riots. St. Dominic died the following year on the Transfiguration, Feast of the Transfiguration, August 6th, 1221. And to his surprise, Jordanus was elected Master General of the Order in 1222. He served 15 years until his death in 1237. Under the leadership of Jordanus, the order expanded to 300 priories, and it increased the number of their provinces from 4 to 12. He traveled constantly, promoting the order, recruited many by his preaching, including St. Albert the Great, whom we met previously. So when Bishop William of Paris contacted him and said, "Oh, our old school's in trouble, and but I'm in trouble, by the way, and I need a friend," but now, when William and Rolando were student friends, neither one of them had obligations. But now Rolando was a Dominican, so he wasn't free to just go do what he wanted. He was happy to help, but he needed permission. So he applied to the Master General, Jordanus, to say, "Okay, this guy is asking me to go do this. Can I go?" Now Jordanus was happy to help, but he had a price. Never for himself. I mean, this wasn't a bribe. He wasn't asking for money, but for the order. Jordanus wanted to open a Dominican studium, a school, in Paris, and he wanted Dominicans to be admitted as students to the University of Paris to earn university degrees. And Bishop William agreed. Now, the Dominicans already had a house in Paris. We covered the background of that previously, which was used by Dominic and by other friars during their work. When they had to go to Paris was the capital, so when they had to go there to do business, they stayed in that house. The house in 1218, a guy named Jean Barastri, also called Jean de Saint Quentin because of the town he was from, gave the house to the order. He met Dominic. He was inspired by him, and now while he didn't become a Dominican, but he did want to support the mission, so he gave him this house. This house had a history. It had a chapel. It contained a chapel, and it was used as a mustering point for French pilgrims who wished to go to visit the shrine in Compostela, Spain, the shrine of St. James. And the location of that, as Paris developed, it eventually gave its name to the street, the Rue. That's the street, street in French, the Rue Saint-Jacques. And it also gave its name to the Dominicans, because this priory, so not the Dominicans didn't change the name, but in this context, in the French, they would often refer to the Dominicans by their place. So their priory is Saint-Jacques, so they call them the Jacobins. And then later, during the French Revolution, there was a radical club, political club, who used a later. So the original Saint-Jacques was followed by another one that had the same name, and that's the one that they stole. And those are the radicals. So the Jacobin is also a name given to the radicals in the French Revolution, even though it had nothing to do with the Dominicans. It was just that the historic memory of that place, and the name Jacobin also applies more generally to political radicals. Now, this should not be confused with the term Jacobite, which has other associations, but that'll take us too far afield. So anyway, the first house on the Rue de Saint-Jacques was the location of the first Dominican Studium Generale, General Studies or House of Studies, in Paris. It opened as a school, started, the Dominican students in 1229 as part of the arrangement between Bishop William and the Master General, Blessed Jordanus, in order to get Friar Rolando to help the bishop to have continuity of theological courses during the strike following the riot of Shrove Tuesday, 1229. So you see, nothing just happens. The Dominicans didn't just appear, there, but it's a lot of details. Anyway, the Franciscans followed the example in 1231. They also opened a house and had students use it as a base and then go study at the University of Paris. So the presence of these mendicant orders, the Dominicans and Franciscans, was instantly resented by the rest of the faculty of the university, those who had not left. Because, from their perspective, the mendicants offered unfair competition. To understand this, you have to see another difference between, even though we use the same term, university, for today and in the Middle Ages, there were many differences. Where age was one we already covered. Another was salaries for the teachers. So today, the institution of the university charges tuition, and you can't start taking classes until you pay that. Well, that wasn't the case in the Middle Ages, because they didn't have thousands of students going out. I mean, higher education was, it was very tiny strata of the population could afford that. So you don't have a university with 50,000 students. So the individual professors would charge the student, and that's how they would make their living. Well, the mendicants didn't charge. The mendicant teachers did not charge in this way, and they didn't have to, because they were living in community. And as we said, that in each community, the friary or the priory assigned 4 of their number, and that was their full-time ministry, to just go and raise funds or food, or to feed the rest of the friars. So they didn't have to charge. Whereas, so that was seen as unfair competition by the rest of the faculty, who had to charge, and that's their livelihood. That's how they made their living. So this went back and forth. So they didn't want mendicants there at all. And they tried to stop it in the university senate. So 2 years passed of negotiations. They complained to the Pope. He's got involved. So Pope Gregory IX issued a bull, Parens Scientiarum, Mother of Sciences, or parent, forebear of science, progenitor of science, on April 13th, 1231. It was addressed to the University of Paris. It guaranteed independence from local authority, placing the university directly under papal patronage. The following year, he issued another bull, Nemis Iniqua, freeing the mendicants from the authority of bishops in whose territory they happened to reside, which was another source of resentment that some had to the mendicants. So some bishops just say, "Oh God, okay, they have this house. We have, they have 20 priests. Well, I could use them to go. You do this and do that. Well, the mendicants would say, "Well, no. It's our general tells us what we do." Just like when Bishop William contacted Friar Rinaldo, even though they were friends, Rinaldo couldn't just go do. Couldn't just go do that. He had to have permission from. So their obedience, in other words, the friar's obedience, was to their superior, not to the bishop. 9 years later, in 1241, Johann of Wildeshausen became the 4th Master General of the Dominicans. So Jordanus was the 2nd, so we're skipping, we're going forward. Johann was a nobleman, also like Jordanus. He was born in the family castle at Wildeshausen, which is in Westphalia. That's the northern Rhineland region, about the year 1180. After childhood tutoring in the family castle, he studied at the University of Bologna in Italy, which is the law school. And there he met and befriended the future Holy Roman Emperor, Frederick II. Later, after he finished, he made a return visit to Bologna, where he met and listened to St. Dominic in person. And like Jordanus, that was it. That there's something about Dominic. And that changed his life. So Johann became a Dominican. He received the habit from Dominic himself in the year 1220 at the age of 40. And he proved to be an outstanding traveling preacher. With the benefit of his aristocrat's education, he was fluent in German, French, Italian, as well as the scholarly language of Latin. He served as Bishop of Bosnia, which then was part of the Kingdom of Hungary, from 1233 to 1237. Now, this was another case where it was a bailout situation. There was a problem. One of the where the bishop in Bosnia had become a heretic. He was deposed, and it was Saint Elizabeth of Hungary, who was a strong supporter of the church. She needed help, and so she contacted the Pope, and the Pope needed somebody he could just send there. So that's how it happened. And once again, the Dominican, you say that, but that's part of the advantage of the mendicant way, is that that's what Francis envisioned, and Dominic, and inspired by Francis, did that they would be completely untethered, so they wouldn't have a monastery that they were tied to or a cathedral they were tied to, so they could go do that. Okay, somebody needs a bishop. Well, they're obviously well enough trained to do it. Okay, we'll go do that. But he didn't do it for the rest of his life. Once things were stable, and once a new guy could be sent, in 1237 he retired as bishop, but remained a Dominican. And then he went back to serve the order. He was appointed provincial in Italy, the province of Lombardy in northern Italy, which from 1238 to 1240. Then, when the Dominican Master General Raymond of Penafor resigned as Master General in the year 1240, then a general chapter met of the order to elect a new Master General, and to his dismay and surprise, Johann of Wildeshausen was elected Master General on the 19th of May, 1241. He served until his death in 1252. His term partially overlaps that of the 6th Minister General of the Order of Friars Minor, the Franciscans. So the Dominican superiors called the Master General. The Franciscans was the Minister General. And the 6th Minister General of the Franciscans was Blessed John of Parma, or Giovanni, because he was Italian. He served in this position for a decade, from 1247 to 1257. Now, he had a completely different background from Jordanus or Johann of Wildeshausen. John of Parma was born into a common family, not serfs. I mean, they weren't tied to the land as serfs, but they were not aristocrats. And he was born in Parma, Italy, in 1209. His uncle was already in ecclesiastical service. He was a chaplain to Church of St. Lazarus in Parma. So he's the one that secured John's early education and connected him to the ecclesiastical as well as the academic world. John joined the Order of Friars Minor, the Franciscans, in 1233, and he taught at the University of Bologna, then the University of Naples, and then the University of Paris. He attended the First Council of Lyon in 1245, which we talked about last time, as a proxy for the then Franciscan Minister General, Crescenzo, who was too ill to attend. When Crescenzo died, John was elected Minister General in July of 1247. He and his Dominican counterpart, Johann of Wildeshausen, inherited the next phase of the mendicant controversy in the University of Paris. In 1252, the mendicants sought permanent professorships at the University of Paris because the faculty opposed them, and so if a permanent chair, as they would say, it's not just a chair to teach, because once you had a license you could teach, but a chair, and we think of it as the chair in the classroom where we would teach, but it referred to a chair in the university senate. So an established full professor with a chair had voting rights in the university senate. And since periodically there were those in the university senate who wanted to vote to get the mendicants out, to deny them authority to teach, the mendicants wanted their chairs. The Dominican wanted a chair, and the Franciscans wanted a chair, so they'd at least each would have one voice in the university senate. And then as time passed, they could count on because some of these were brilliant teachers, they would have students and they would have influence on their students. And some of those students would grow up themselves to end up, becoming in positions such as being on the university senate, so they could help. Anyway, it was like a self-defense measure. Now, from the perspective of the faculty, the other faculty, this was an escalation. Instead of just simply having the friars take classes at the university, and then having their own school where they taught their own, elsewhere in the city. Now they want a permanent say in the university structure. So that was seen as encroachment and a threat by the rest of the faculty, at least many in the rest of the faculty. So once more, this put them in attack mode. Now this time they were supported by the Bishop of Paris. Bishop William was deceased. Now it was another guy, Bishop Renaud Mignon. He did not like the mendicants, so he reversed the pro-mendicant policies of Bishop William. On the faculty, the leader of the anti-mendicants was a guy named Guillaume de Saint-Amour, or Saint-Amour, A-M-O-U-R. He argued that an academic university career did not in any way conform to the charism of the mendicants, as the mendicants publicly claimed their charism was. That if you want to live by begging, and you want to travel around, you don't want to have any stability, you want to be free to go do all of this. Well, then that's the opposite of the life of a professional academic at a university. Who just has that one job at that one place and does that for a career. So he accused him of being hypocritical. Now there's an eyewitness of all of this, Matthew of Paris, who, just to confuse things, was actually English, but he studied at the University of Paris, and he was a monk at St. Albans in England. He was a chronicler, among his other jobs. He was a chronicler for the monastery, but he was one, because of his education, he got assigned by the abbey to travel, and so he includes, even though it's a chronicle of St. Albans, of the monastery, he does include many stories of that from outside of England, and including this controversy at the university. He says, and he had no, he was a monastic, he wasn't a mendicant, so he had no, he didn't really care. Well, I shouldn't say he didn't care, but it's like he wasn't personally involved in the outcome of the dispute, so he's kind of an impartial observer. He said that this mendicant controversy almost destroyed the University of Paris. That, once again, lectures were suspended. There was some violence that took place between students of the contending groups. And some scholars and students simply left and went to other universities. This time, Pope Innocent IV sided with the university faculty. He thought maybe they are going too far. In a bull dated November 21st, 1254, he sided with them. And by sided with them, I mean that William of St. Amour and the faculty went to the Pope and they said, "Look, these mendicants, they're demanding chairs on the university faculty, and we think this contradicts their mendicant way." And Pope Innocent sided with the faculty and told the mendicants to back off, that they did not have, any kind of right or any kind of standing to demand that. That was the state of affairs when Alexander IV became Pope. The mendicants had students at the university, and they did have teachers. They did have precedents of teachers at the university. Last time we met the Franciscan Alexander of Hales, and we met the Dominican Albert the Great. But up to that point, no mendicant had been awarded a doctorate, and no mendicant had been awarded a permanent chair on the faculty. So after Pope Innocent, after he died, then the mendicants worked behind the scenes to reverse the Pope's decision by pointing out to the new Pope that some members of the university faculty were actively teaching theology inimical to the faith, and that membership in the university senate would give them, the mendicants, insight, sort of insider knowledge, as well as some influence against such trends. And, of course, they would have a vote in who got promoted from student to bachelor, from bachelor to license, from license to magister to master, then from master to doctor. But before that strategy could succeed, the behind the scenes, the mendicants were subverted by one of their own, which reintroduces into our story the late Joachim of Fior. I talked about him during the reign of Innocent III, and you may have wondered why. Why would I talk about this guy? Well, recall that the Fourth Lateran Council in 1215 condemned him by name. He was deceased by that point. He died in 1202, but condemned his writings by name, which contain millenarian eschatology. And it was condemned on two grounds. First, because he claimed to know the date of the end of the world. He predicted it would come in the year 1260. Second, he asserted that the year 1260 would begin the age of the Holy Spirit, which contradicts Acts of the Apostles chapter 2, which recorded the descent of the Holy Spirit at Pentecost. So, an Italian Franciscan named Gerardo of Borgo San Donino, or Brother Gerardo, published a very imprudent book in the year 1254 entitled An Introduction to the Eternal Gospel. I recall the Eternal Gospel was the name of Joachim's book that got condemned, the Eternal Gospel. So Brother Gerardo is writing an introduction to that, defending Joachim as having been misunderstood. So in it, in the Eternal Gospel, Joachim had identified or referred to a group he called the Order of the Just. And those are the ones most open to the Holy Spirit, who are the ones who would take over the church in the age of the Spirit, which would begin in the year 1260. Well, in his introduction to the Eternal Gospel, Friar Gerardo said that Order of the Just is the Franciscans. And, of course, he's a Franciscan. He was a Franciscan. So he said, it's the Franciscans who are the ones who are obviously most open to the Spirit and the ones who will usher in this age of the Spirit, which from his perspective, when he wrote, was only 6 years in the future. He's wrote in 1254, and Joachim foretold it was going to take place in 1260. So the university faculty, of course, they love this because this completely, a mendicant defending a guy who had already been condemned by name at a church council. So they seized on this. William of St. Amour, who must have been at least a deacon in terms of holy orders, because he gave a sermon in which he denounced the mendicants in general, for this. And this sermon was well received. So William went farther, and he wrote a treatise against the entire mendicant way of life as being improper. And it was titled De Periculis, the dangers of the end times, our dangers is plural, our dangers in the end time. It was a devastating character assassination, or institutional character assassination, based on the warning against false prophets during the end times, found in the second letter to Timothy, chapter 3, first 9 verses. Quote, "But understand this, there will be terrifying times in the last days. People will be self-centered, lovers of money, proud, haughty, abusive, disobedient to their parents, ungrateful, irreligious, callous, implacable, slanderous, licentious, brutal, hating what is good, traitors, reckless, conceited, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God, as they make a pretense of religion but deny its power. Reject them. For some of these slip into homes and make captives of women weighed down by sin, led by various desires, always trying to learn but never able to reach knowledge of the truth. Just as Jannes and Jambres opposed Moses, those are the tradition. The names aren't given in the Bible, but in traditional writings, those are the names of the two Egyptian priests that Pharaoh had set against Moses. Just as Jannes and Jambres opposed Moses, so they also oppose the truth. People of depraved mind, unqualified in the faith, but they will not make further progress, for their foolishness will be plain to all, as it was with those two. In its most important section of this work, so he quotes that, William of St. Amour quotes that, and then from that he identifies the mendicants as those false prophets of the end time. So, and there's a whole section where he lists 39 signa, or signs, by which false apostles may be known. And this is intended to be understood as describing the mendicants as incarnations of the hierovagi, condemned by St. Benedict in his rule. So in the Patristus course, we covered St. Benedict, who did not invent monastic life. It was but 2 centuries after, well, 3 centuries after it originated in Egypt, in the East, St. Benedict wrote a book, a document called the Regula, or the Rule, which became the framework for the way monasticism developed in the West. And in it, he, at the beginning, in chapter 1, he goes through the different kinds of monks. And the hierovagi, and that's spelled Gyrovagi, that's the plural, or hierovagus for the singular. He denounced them as wretched. So in the Regula, chapter 1, quote, "The fourth kind of monks are those called the hierovagi. These spend their whole lives tramping from province to province, staying as guests in different monasteries for 3 or 4 days at a time. Always on the move, with no stability, they indulge their own wills and succumb to the allurements of sin, and are in every way worse than the Sarabites. Of the miserable conduct of all such men, it is better to be silent than to speak." So you see, William of St. Amour is taking what St. Francis intended for the mendicants as an advantage. They're being untethered, not bound to a particular monastery or particular diocese, and turning it into being something bad. And quoting, out of context, but quoting Benedict from the 6th century to impugn a religious, an ecclesial construct of the 13th century. Okay, so I won't read all 39, but there are a few signa, sign. For example, sign number 3 is a refusal to be corrected, which, of course, would be, one is meant to infer that that means the mendicants are prideful. Signa number 6, preaching without a summons. So that's a dig at the privilege they had, that they could preach without the request of their bishop or a pastor of the location, and even if that person refused, they still had the right to preach. But again, remember the context we covered last time. That's because of the that privilege was first granted to the Dominicans because they're preaching against the heresy in France, and many, lamentably, but many bishops and priests were Cathar heretics. So obviously would not want the Dominican Dominic or any of the others preaching against them. So that's why the Pope granted them that privilege. But again, here, without the context, he's taking it as, they're just pride, they're just doing whatever they want. 9. This is a direct dig. Living by begging rather than their own labor. So that's a dig. And remember, the first Pope Benedict III, as well as Pope Honorius III, did have some concerns about that, living by begging, but not because that there's a finite amount of charity. So if they're voluntarily undertaking this life of begging, then those who really didn't have a choice, who have to beg, maybe they won't have enough left for them too. But anyway, so now William is taking this and saying begging rather than by their own labor. But that isn't, again, that's a misrepresentation. So the mendicants were offering labor. They were preaching, they were hearing confessions, they were teaching. So they weren't just, they weren't just begging. They were begging, but they also were laboring. And you get the point. So that's all that. Number 19, Signa 19, causing discord in the church. Of course. Okay, so Pope Alexander IV. He's got all these here and all these doctors from all sides. He handled separately the issues of Friar Gerardo's possible heresy, or certainly his defense of a guy who had been condemned as a heretic. He handled that separately from the issue of the mendicant professorships at the University of Paris. Pope Alexander annulled the university statutes against the mendicants on April 14th, 1255, meaning he commanded the university to allow the mendicants to earn doctorates and to each have a chair. There were 2 chairs, so the Dominicans and Franciscans would each have a chair on the University Senate. The following month, May of 1255, the Master General of the Dominicans wrote to the other Dominicans, said, okay, we won. I mean, he phrased it more dignified than that. He said, okay, essentially we won. We got this, but don't gloat and avoid needlessly provoking the secular clergy. So, try, even though we have the privilege of preaching somewhere without, we don't need the bishop's permission, but it is best to request that permission, as a courtesy, and only go against that if there are really grounds, like there were originally in Dominic's life, if the bishop happened to be a Cathar heretic, and that's why he didn't want him to preach. 5 months later, dealing with the other issue, Friar Gerardo, Pope Alexander assigned a commission of cardinals to examine Friar Gerardo's book, The Introduction to the Eternal Gospel. They condemned it on October 23rd, 1255, as hopelessly tainted with the already condemned propositions of Joachim of Fiore. 1 year later, on October 5th, 1256, Pope Alexander condemned William of St. Amour, the faculty opponent of the mendicants. Condemned his work, the De Periculis, as being an absurd, tissue of fabrications and slander, calumny. Reluctantly, the university submitted. William of St. Amour refused to accept it, so he lost his chair. Ironically, he lost his chair at the university and was removed from the faculty. So with all of this, as I mentioned last time, St. Bonaventure, the Franciscan, and St. Thomas Aquinas, the Dominican, had completed all of the requirements for a doctorate, but the university had denied them that for reasons already covered. So once this was done in 1256, then the next year in 1257, Aquinas and Bonaventure became the first mendicants to receive doctorates from the University of Paris. And And this is essential in the history of medieval scholasticism, as there are many, including those two, who were great scholars in their own right, but many who would follow them, that were able to follow them because of this fight, because the Mendicants prevailed in this dispute. The condemned Franciscan millenarian, Friar Gerardo, was a lifelong friend of the guy we already met, Blessed John of Parma, who was the Minister General of the Franciscans. So John was therefore discredited by the association, especially because Friar Gerardo refused to recant. After his work was condemned, the proper thing to do would have been to recant. So, well, okay, I thought, but I'll just submit to the church. But he didn't. So John of Parma then resigned his position as Franciscan Minister General. He didn't leave the order. I mean, he was still a priest, but he resigned his position as Minister General on February 2nd, 1257. He was followed on that duty as Minister General by none other than St. Bonaventure, who became the 7th Minister General of the Franciscans, position he held until 1274. The same year that Bonaventure received this, was elected, they elect their Minister Generals, 1257, the Maison de Sorbonne was established as a college. That's the House of Sorbonne. Was established as a college in Paris, originally intended to teach theology to 20 poor students at a time. The founder was Robert, or is French, so Robert de Sorbonne, Sorbonne. Robert was born into poverty, and he escaped poverty through church service and the education that it provided. Attracting the attention and the patronage of the Count d'Artois, as well as the King Louis IX of France, St. Louis, King of France, Robert was educated at Reims and at Paris, enabling his selection as canon of the Cathedral at Cambrai in 1251. And then he became a canon of the Cathedral of Notre Dame in Paris in 1253. There he began teaching at the students at the University of Paris. But he never forgot his background. People who have a hard early years, especially if that hardship is because of poverty, they react different ways. Some of them go to the opposite extreme. They become hedonist, and they try to pretend, that they never were like the what's that novel? Can't believe it's gone. Fitzgerald. Gatsby. Jay Gatsby, the main character in The Great Gatsby. He was one who, he was ashamed kind of his background. So some react that way, but he didn't. Robert didn't. He remembered. He never forgot his background, and he never forgot the gratitude for the education that he received from the church, which, was free. So he wanted to pay it forward, as we'd say today. So in February of 1257, Robert set aside revenue from his benefice as a cathedral canon to create a house in which he would live. It was his house, but it also was big enough where he would house 20 students at a time, and he would pay all their fees, provide books, lodging, food, while they pursued their higher studies at the university. And then when they finished, then that slot, he'd fill. His resources weren't infinite, so he couldn't do that for everybody, but it'd be 20 at a time. And so, say when the 2 or 3 of the oldest ones finished, they got and one moved on. Well, then those 3 slots could be filled with some more. So that was going to be the way he gave back. So this Maison de Sorbonne, Robert's house, Sorbonne's house, became the collège, the college, the Sorbonne College, and the old motto of the University of Paris. Quote, Sorbonne University, creators of future since 1257 refers to this date. So the college, the Maison de Sorbonne, the College de Sorbonne, became a center around which college activities kind of clustered. So they didn't have a single campus yet at that point. So that's how the name just kind of by metonymy. So it became the Sorbonne University. The college, the Sorbonne, was closed along with all other Catholic schools in 1793 during the French Revolution. In 1258, so 1 year after he opened the Maison, Robert became confessor to King Louis IX and chancellor of the University of Paris until his death in 1274. Owing to all of those associations, especially chancellor, the Maison de Sorbonne became the focal point for the university organization, hence the name. And as he devoted the last 20 years of his life to that. Okay, so he opened the house in 1257. 2 years later, in 1259, Aquinas, St. Thomas Aquinas, was appointed papal theologian. Meanwhile, back with the Crusades, remember we last left St. Louis IX. He was humiliated in the Crusade, the Seventh Crusade, by Baibars. Meanwhile, so after that, after Louis and the Crusade failed, Baibars made himself Sultan of Egypt and did something no one thought possible. On September 3rd, 1260, he engaged and defeated a Mongol army in the Jezreel Valley in the Holy Land. He captured the Mongol chieftain and had him sewn alive inside the gutted corpse of a horse, and that was left in the sun. He was alive inside of it, and they just listened as he screamed as he was being devoured by maggots. So that's Baibars. Never before had a Mongol army been decisively defeated. Now, no one knew it at the time, but that defeat marked the farthest extent of the Mongol advance westward. So the Mongols never did conquer the Holy Land or Egypt as they had intended. Pope Alexander IV died on May 25th, 1261, after a reign of 6 years and 5 months. Let's see. All right. I think I'm going to stop here. This is an hour. The previous file I uploaded was 3 hours, and it took 5 hours for it to render. So I'm going to pause here, and we'll pick up next time with Pope 182, Urban IV. So for now, thank you for your attention. This session is adjourned.